Paris, and this is CNN.
Good morning from CNN London. I'm Nina Dos Santos.
Good afternoon from CNN Hong Kong. I'm Pauline Chu, and this is World Business Today. Here are the top stories on this Thursday. Face-to-face for the first time since the U.S. government shut down. Congressional leaders meet the president, but there's still no deal.
The shutdown means no trip to the Philippines for Barack Obama. Well, the Philippines' own finance minister gives me his take on the international impact of America's crisis.
And will FIFA move the 2022 World Cup to winter? We explore the economic impact for the host nation, Qatar. We'll get down to business in just a moment, but first, these are the top world news stories that we're following here at CNN. The leader of Greece's extreme-right Golden Dawn Party is being held on charges of running a criminal organization. Nikos Mikaloliakos was arrested on Saturday, 2 weeks after a popular hip-hop artist was stabbed to death. He denies the charges against him. Workers at Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant have discovered yet another leak of highly radioactive water. The plant operator, TEPCO, says the leak was discovered on Tuesday. An unknown quantity of water seeped into the Pacific Ocean. Sandbags have been put down to try to block further outflows. About 300 tons of radioactive water leaked from a different tank back in August. The drama of Italian politics opens another act on Friday. A parliamentary committee will discuss whether to expel Silvio Berlusconi from the Senate because he has been convicted of tax fraud. Berlusconi dropped his plans to try to topple the government on Wednesday, and in the end, Prime Minister Enrico Letta won a confidence vote. Nina.
Pauline, let's go back to the United States, where the good news is that cross-party talks have taken place over the government shutdown now into day 3. The bad news is, though, they didn't get anywhere, even after President Barack Obama and congressional leaders spoke for about an hour. Little progress that was apparent as they emerged, still pointing fingers at each other from that meeting. Democrats and Republicans remain in a deadlock over the country's budget. Much of the federal government is shut down now for a third day, as Brianna Keeler now reports.
For the first time since the government shut down, congressional leaders met face-to-face with President Obama at the White House Wednesday night, both sides emerging with no deal and no signs of progress to end the stalemate.
The president reiterated one more time tonight that he will not negotiate.
We're through playing these little games.
Republicans still demanding President Obama accept a delay to his signature health care program.
All we're asking for here is a discussion and fairness for the American people under Obamacare.
Am I exasperated? Absolutely, I'm exasperated.
In an interview with CNBC, the president reiterated he won't give in on Obamacare, but said he will negotiate on budgetary issues like taxes, spending, entitlement reform, if House Republicans first agree to reopen the government for several weeks.
We have a situation right now where if John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, puts a bill on the floor to reopen the government at current funding levels so that we can then negotiate on a real budget that allows us to stop governing from crisis to crisis, it would pass.
The president is probably right, but that's not happening anytime soon. Instead, House Republicans held votes again on funding the government in a piecemeal way that the Senate will surely reject. Meanwhile, not far from the Capitol, the World War II memorial, operated by the largely shuttered National Park Service, has become a proxy in this battle. To counter images of World War II vets showing up to the barricaded memorial, the RNC offering to pay to keep it open.
Our veterans deserve the freedom to see this memorial, and we're willing to pay the bill. Now it's up to the president just to let them in.
Brianna Keeler, CNN, Washington.
As Brianna mentioned, the House did manage to pass through other targeted spending measures on Wednesday, and they include bills to reopen national parks and fund Washington, D.C. operations and the National Institutes of Health. The piecemeal approach hopes to pressure Democrats to drive spending towards more Republican-backed programs and away from Obamacare. These measures won't likely pass the Democratic-led Senate. A Majority Leader Harry Reid called the approach, quote, reckless and irresponsible. Mr. Obama has signaled that he would veto the measures if they even reached his desk. Nina.
Pauline, as Washington continues to wrangle over the budget, a second deadline is looming just around the corner. The government has exactly just 2 weeks from here on to raise the debt ceiling for America, or else this country will run out of money to pay its bills. And that could have some pretty severe knock-on effects across world markets. So Mr. Obama met with more than a dozen Wall Street bank chiefs at the White House on Wednesday. They delivered a warning, namely that the U.S. financial system would suffer if the shutdown and the debt limit weren't resolved.
Will you pressure the president to go?
There's a consensus that we shouldn't do anything that hurts this recovery that is a little bit shallow, not very well established, and is quite vulnerable. And the shutdown of the government, but particularly a failure to raise the debt ceiling, would accomplish that.
There's no debate that the seriousness of the U.S. not paying its debts, whether it's Social Security checks, small business loans, or whatever, all the way up to the Treasury notes and bills, is the most serious thing we have. And we witnessed that in August 11, and you saw the ramifications, the slowdown in the economy, and we're facing that again. So, yeah, I think that everybody understands that. There's not a debate about that. The question is, what's the path to get it? That's a political question, but we spent most of the meeting talking about what we see in the economy and how we'd see it affected by that, and it'd be serious repercussions.
There's precedent for a government shutdown. There's no precedent for default. We're the most important economy in the world. We're the reserve currency of the world. Payments have to go out to people. If money doesn't flow in, then money doesn't flow out. So we really haven't seen this before, and I'm not anxious to be a part of the process that witnesses it.
Wall Street leaders, including Lloyd Blankfein, they're delivering their message to the White House yesterday. Well, earlier, Jack Welch, the former chairman and CEO of General Electric, spoke to CNN's Piers Morgan. He says a lack of dialogue is what's brought Washington to its current state of gridlock.
Well, when I was running GE, we met with the union all the time. GE had strikes in the 60s and the 70s. We never had a strike in 21 years because we were talking face-to-face, not the day of the negotiation, but for 3 years in between it. They knew us. We knew their families. We knew all about them. This is a human thing. These are guys that are acting like robots who don't talk, who don't schmooze, who don't have a beer together, who don't hang out. It's wrong.
That's Jack Welch there, not mincing any words. We are seeing more examples of the shutdown affecting the private sector, especially companies that do business with the government. For example, United Technologies makes all sorts of equipment for the U.S. military, including the Black Hawk helicopter. It says it's having to hold up production and could send workers home. The reason is there have to be government inspectors present to audit the manufacturing process, and those inspectors are not at work right now. It says around 2,000 workers will likely be stood down next week at Sikorsky aircraft plants in Connecticut, Florida, and Alabama. If the shutdown continues into next month, the company says more than 5,000 people could be furloughed as its Pratt & Whitney division makes aircraft engines is affected. And Nina, this is just one defense company, but things could get much, much worse if this whole shutdown drags on a couple more days.
Yeah, it's not just Main Street that's being affected by this, it's also Wall Street and a number of these companies that are contractors to Washington as well. Let's have a look at how it's affecting markets over here, because obviously we're into a new trading session here in Europe, heading thankfully towards the end of what's been a rather tumultuous week on a number of these markets, politically speaking, with the impasse in Italy now being sorted out, but also a keen eye on what's going on in Washington. The FTSE 100 here in London is creeping back after dropping to a one-month low in yesterday's session. By contrast, though, what we have is the Etc. DAX over there in Frankfurt, unchanged, but it is close to an all-time high, which is good for that market. Attention does remain firmly fixed on the US government shutdown, and more worryingly, that October the 17th deadline on the US debt debacle, which could see the United States, some say it is a rare prospect, but it is still potentially on the cards, defaulting on its debt, and that, of course, would really rock the dollar. So investors remain anxious that there's no compromise in sight on these two issues so far, Pauline.
Yeah, and I would say that international investors are certainly more worried about that October 17th deadline, more so than the immediate shutdown at the moment, because it does affect possibly the U.S.'s credit rating and whether or not it can actually pay its debts to other countries. Well, let's take a look at the stock markets here in the Asia-Pacific region. They ended up mostly up to date, so it seems like they shrugged off largely the drama going on there on Capitol Hill. Markets in China are closed for a public holiday today, but encouraging encouraging numbers from Beijing did help to boost markets across the region, including the Hang Seng here in Hong Kong, which ended up by 1%. Now, China's services sector expanded at its fastest pace in 6 months. It rose to 55.4 in September, up from 53.9 the month before. Of course, a reading above 50 means the sector is expanding. This higher reading is important because it does indicate that there is growth in domestic consumption in China. Meanwhile, India's Sensex led the gains as the rupee rose against the dollar today, and it helped to encourage buying across many of its sectors, including the IT sector as well as metals and the auto industry. So right now it is trading up by 1.5%, the Sensex there. Japan's Nikkei closed mostly flat today, and markets in South Korea are also closed for its National Foundation Day. Nina.
Right, now that we've had a look at Asia and also Europe, let's have a look at how things fared in the United States market session yesterday. Wall Street became more jittery, of course, about the consequences of that political stalemate in Washington on Wednesday. All of the major US indices managed to pull back from some steep losses at the open, but they still couldn't make it above the flat line and closed in the red. The Dow dropping around about 1/3 of 1% on the day. The Nasdaq and the S&P 500 finished the session just below the flat line, so losses not quite as pronounced as for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Let's have a look at one stock that really saw its shares slip yesterday. Tesla falling 6% on the day. This sell-off came as a research firm called Baird downgraded the stock, and the auto website jalopnik.com posted images of a Tesla model in flames. Tesla did respond to that incident, saying that the vehicle in question hit a large metallic object and that automatic alerts would have warned the driver to pull over. The company says that the battery fire only started after the driver was clear of the car, so nobody, thankfully, was hurt. But that has been worrying for Tesla and for its investors because the stock slipped. Well, Wall Street kicks off Thursday's session in just over 5 hours from now. So let's have a look at how the futures are indicating the early trades. As you can see, starting on the downside, at least for the moment's time, the heaviest losses coming from the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures. A lot more of the companies that could be affected by what's going on in Washington vis-a-vis the debt debacle and also the stalemate on the budget and the government shutdown are listed on that market. That is one of the reasons why that market is down in the futures. Pauline.
Well, coming up next, the U.S. president is forced to cancel a trip to one of the world's fastest growing economies. Up next, we'll tell you why the Philippines was on his list in the first place.
Where can you find the largest collection of real estate opportunities in the Middle East? The 12th edition of Cityscape Global will be 50% bigger, featuring 200+ exhibitors and 25,000+ visitors. Meeting point for the global real estate industry, featuring the region's largest showcase of investment and leasing opportunities across residential, commercial, industrial, retail and hospitality real estate sector from 8th to 10th of October 2013 at the Dubai World Trade Center.
Creating new levels of comfort. It's just one of the lengths we go to make you feel at home.
Also die letzten 2 Wochen sind wir durch die wunderschönsten Ecken von Südafrika gereist.
Das ist so cool.
Ja, wilde Tiere zu beobachten, ganz besonders für mich. Man weiß nie, was in der nächsten Ecke kommt, welches Tier man wieder sieht.
Die Natur hier ist einfach gigantisch. Egal an welchen Flecken wir hier kommen, die Weite ist unfassbar.
Das ist auf alle Fälle eine der spektakulärsten Sachen, die ich bisher gemacht habe.
Absolut besonders war für mich die freundliche Herzlichkeit der Menschen.
Auch
Ich glaube, momentan könnte es uns kaum besser gehen. Wenn mir jemand erzählt, er hat die ganze Welt gesehen, aber war nicht hier, dann hat er sie halt leider doch nicht ganz gesehen.
Also ich fühle mich gerade frei.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. The US government shutdown is forcing the President Barack Obama to cut short an upcoming trip to Asia. He's cancelled visits to the Philippines and Malaysia and is instead sending his Secretary of State John Kerry. For now, Mr. Obama is still scheduled to visit Indonesia and Brunei next week for two major regional summits. But cancelling the two other visits is hurting one of his top foreign policy goals. Mr. Obama wants to strengthen ties with Asian economies and try and offset China's growing influence in this region. Take the Philippines, for example. US trade figures from 2011 show that two-way trade between these countries totaled some $22 billion. Now compare that to China. Well, state media there says that trade between China and the Philippines totaled $30 billion that same year.
Well, both countries want to tap into the potential there. The Philippines grew 6.8% last year, making it one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. And fast growth is one of the reasons that Moody's just upgraded the Philippines credit rating by one notch to Baa3 with a positive outlook. And helping to power that growth are remittances. That's the money overseas Filipino workers send back home. The Philippines Central Bank says those workers pumped almost $21.5 billion into the country's banks last year. That's equal to 8.5% of the entire economy. And Nina, as you know, there's a huge Filipino population here in Hong Kong. Many of them have lived here for years and only go back home maybe once every 2 years because they need to work and send that money back to their relatives.
And as such, the value of that money is so important for this country and also for their relatives too. Well, Pauline, those remittances are paid in US dollars, which means that the threat of a US default and its impact on the dollar is an important consideration here. I spoke to the Philippines finance minister and asked him whether he's worried about that and the effect that all of this would have on his economy at home.
Well, the US is the global reserve currency, and I think the U.S. Political leaders know that the U.S. benefits a lot from it, and they won't bring it to a point where people will revisit the U.S. role as the U.S. dollar role as reserve currency. So I believe that they will ultimately resolve that issue and not bring it to a point where people will lose confidence about the dollar. But the good thing about the Philippines is we're a structural current account surplus country on the back of remittances and our BPO industry. And now with tourism helping in, that will even make us stronger. So we can continue to fund consumption and investments in our infrastructure, which assures us that we can continue growing the country at the rate we're growing right now.
And part of that involves your technology sector, your nascent tech boom, which seems to be happening, particularly in the semiconductor space and elsewhere. How important is that to your future goals?
We're trying to sell more and attract more investments from Europe. As you know, the Eurozone is the world's largest economic zone. But when you look at it from our trade statistics, they're not number one. They're, I think, number 4 and number 5. So Europe, even though they're having difficulties, an opportunity for us. Africa is another area. So the key is, one, diversify geographically, diversify the export products. One of the fastest growing exports of the Philippines is ships. We're now the 4th largest shipbuilding country of the world. We have industrial process outsourcing that is producing in the Philippines the modules of factories to be built abroad.
You've said before that investment in infrastructure, reliable energy and infrastructure platform is what's needed to try and attract foreign direct investment. The other thing companies will mention when it comes to the Philippines is its record on corruption. What are you doing to stamp out corruption? Because this has been a long-running problem for decades for the Philippines.
That's exactly the agenda of President Aquino when he ran for office, good governance. His motto is good governance is good economics. In the 3 years that he's been in office, we've reduced corruption dramatically.
How much?
Well, it's anecdotal at this point. We need to do a formal study. But when you look at the World Economic Forum rating, we started out at 85, now we're at 59. I think there's no other country with a 26-notch improvement in 3 years. A big component of that is improvement in the governance and macroeconomic environment of the country. The people, if you look at social media in the Philippines, are very aware of the fact that corruption is bad for us. And the important thing is you solve it by filing cases, improving institutions, creating a meritocracy. Ultimately, creating a meritocracy will be the solution.
And to create a meritocracy, what you need is economic empowerment, don't you? A lot of people from the Philippines move abroad to work abroad, and so much of the money that comes back into the Philippines is in the form of remittances. What's the outlook like for remittances?
The good thing about our overseas Filipino workers are they're actually spread out all over the world. We do have about 3 million in the Middle East. They remitted, all in all, the 10 million remitted over $23 billion last year. And they've shown the resiliency even through the global economic crisis in 2008. The numbers actually held. And I think what's important to note with our overseas Filipino workers is they're not a static group. Some do come back to the Philippines, and that has resulted to us being now number 4 in shipbuilding in the world because of the wealth of welding skills that are now available in the Philippines from experience in the Middle East. We're working on our macroeconomic fundamentals, on our fiscal issue, on our external position, on making it easier to do business in the Philippines, on empowering our people. For example, our education budget has been increased 50% since President Aquino came in. Our healthcare budget, 77%. Our program of supporting the poorest of the poor, more than quadrupled, because we want to make sure that we reap the demographic dividend by making sure that the children of the poor is kept in school and brought to health centers. And I think that's ultimately going to be the key, to make sure that each and every Filipino become productive participants in our economy.
Well, that was the Philippines Finance Minister, Cesar Purisimo, talking to me about the outlook for the fast-growing economy, also talking about the outlook for the dollar if the United States does default on its debt, with the debt ceiling looming exactly 2 weeks from now. The interesting thing he had to say was, well, you know, they can print their way out of the impasse at the moment because people want dollars. They really can't afford to undermine the confidence in the world's reserve currency. Still to come here on the show, though, we focus on fragrance and profile a fashion leader in the Middle East who's bringing ancient Arabian scents to the rest of the world.
Discover a magical city that inspired a Nobel Prize novelist. Imagine what you can experience here. Colombia is magical realism. The answer is Colombia.
It's a new dawn in Africa, and our enormous potential and opportunities are being harnessed by one bank. UBA, United Bank for Africa, stands strong as the bank of choice for Africans and Africa-related businesses, uniting African people and businesses with the world. So, make the wise choice today. Bank with UBA, Africa's global bank.
Positive transformations in association with Kirloskar.
This is the deepest submerged tunnel ever built in the world. It's 1.4 kilometers long, and depth is 56 meters underwater. Now, people are moving from one side to other side, mostly using the bridges with their cars or public transport. There are too many buses and cars, and makes a very big congestion. With this project, these congestions will end. The transportation means improvement in trade, and also the improvement on the social life of the people. So 1 million passengers per day to travel will ease the life of citizens of Istanbul.
Frankincense, myrrh, jasmine and musk. The Middle East has been famous for fragrances for thousands of years. But turning Arabian scents into a model global business takes more than a rich tradition. I sat down with Sheikh Majid Al Sabah, a fashion icon and entrepreneur in his native Kuwait and elsewhere. Together, we discussed his latest pet project and the challenges that it presents.
He's already a royal, but now he wants to become the king of fragrance.
A little bit of oud, a little bit of musk, and a twist of rose.
It's light, but spicy.
Exactly.
A member of the Kuwaiti ruling family, Sheikh Majid Al Sabah, has brought his sweet scents from the Middle East to London, launching the perfume brand TFK, or the Fragrance Kitchen, a new branch to his fashion retail empire.
Why go into perfumes? Isn't this already a bit of a saturated market?
It is, in fact, a saturated market. However, I think that it is something that came from my background. In the Middle East, mostly old men and women, they keep a secret recipe of ingredients of fragrances for themselves. And being brought up by my grandmother, I adapted to her knowledge and her way of doing fragrances.
With the global fragrance industry estimated to be worth some $38.8 billion by 2017, Sheikh Majid Al Sabah hopes to make TFK a success that further vindicates his career in fashion.
I can tell you, 1991, it was the year that I had so much of horrible time dealing it with my family, because for people back in the Middle East, which is very much male-oriented, everybody was saying, oh, you're the nephew of the emir and you're starting a fashion business, you're going to deal with clothes and shoes. It's such a disgrace for the family. And it was very challenging for me to overcome this complication. And that's something which I had to fight for.
Al Sabah also fought hard to persuade European and American luxury brands like Gucci and Calvin Klein to sell their goods in the Middle East.
They didn't know about the market, and then back in the 90s, they were all over the idea of expanding in Japan and the US. And let me tell you one thing, it changed through a lot of effort that I have put, even myself, into trying to expose the Middle East and change the mentality and change the perception.
Very candid interview there from Sheikh Majid Al Sabah. And if you want to see the whole interview, tune into Marketplace Middle East with John Defterios. That airs at 16:45, so 4:45 London time on Thursday. So tune into that later. I must say, he was a really interesting person to meet in profile, Pauline.
Yeah, and he seemed like he was very honest with you, so I look forward to the full interview. Well, you are watching World Business Today from London and Hong Kong. In the autumn coolness of Switzerland, FIFA officials are talking about a very hot topic, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. And in a moment, we'll look at what will happen if they decide it's just too hot to play.
For centuries, the book has been the very symbol of learning. Yet throughout history, there's always been one small problem. The knowledge inside these books has only been within reach of a select few. But now that your SIM card can be your library card, all these books are available on any mobile device, which means they can reach people and places they never could before. So say goodbye to the book as we know it and say welcome to the new world.
Make, Create, Innovate in association with the European Patent Office, supporting innovation, competitiveness and economic growth.
It looks like a disc of the thinnest black paper. This is made of graphene, 1,000 layers of it.
Graphene is a material that is one atom thick, and this is a kind of materials we have never seen before.
The first ever 2D structure and the strongest material on Earth.
It's the thinnest material you can possibly imagine. It's the strongest material we're aware of. It's stronger than diamond. It conducts electricity 1,000 times better than copper.
Hundreds of patents have been taken out by companies like Samsung for different uses of graphene. Here with its bendable phone screen.
Imagine the products you could design with this.
spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I wanna be a part of it. New York, New York. If I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere. New York.
Quest means business. New city, new time. Weeknights on CNN.
I'm Ni'mal Baqir in Nairobi, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London. A warm welcome back, everyone, to World Business Today. Well, we're almost through with the trading week. This is Thursday's session, and we're 90 minutes into it. As you can see, it's gotten off to another rocky start, at least for the Eurozone markets. Those two down. The etc. DAX, might point out, though, is on an all-time high, or at least close to that, even though it's sunk below the flat line. So that is good news. FTSE 100 recovering from yesterday's rocky ride. Investors still keeping a close eye fixed on the US government shutdown now into its third day, but more worryingly, the looming deadline on the country's debt, which could see the United States default on October the 17th.
Yeah, we are looking ahead to that date. We've marked it on our calendars, but it seems as if the investors here in the Asia-Pacific region really did shrug off the immediate impact of the shutdown in Washington. Take a look. Most of the indices ended in positive territory, but we did have some light volume because some of the indices were closed today for a public holiday. Data came out of China, even though the Shanghai Composite was closed, and that data showed that the services PMI hit its fastest pace in 6 months. It came out at 55.4 for the month of September. Anything above 50 indicates expansion. And this is a good sign because it means that there is more growth in the domestic consumption aspect of the economy, which is what Beijing is trying to focus on. The Hang Seng rallied off the back of that news, as did the main Aussie benchmark. Right now, the Sensex is trading up by 1.6%. But again, Shanghai and also the Seoul Kospi was closed today, Nina, for a public holiday.
Well, in the world of sport, football bosses are meeting in Switzerland this week to review what's become a highly controversial decision. It surrounds the sport's biggest prize, the World Cup. Construction has already begun, so if the 2020 tournament is actually taken away from Qatar, set to be the host nation, then, well, the dates could be moved, and that would be unprecedented. Huge sums of money and also difficult logistics are at stake here, as CNN's Alex Thomas now explains from Zurich.
Truly global events don't get much bigger than football's World Cup. This promo video for Brazil 2014 gives you a feel for the excitement of an event watched by billions of people across the planet, earning billions of dollars for its organisers, FIFA. Qatar! So, the decision 3 years ago to pick a small Middle Eastern nation to host the 2022 tournament was certainly bold. And as the celebrations faded, calls grew to take the World Cup away from Qatar or move the dates because its summer weather is simply too hot.
I will always support that we have to play in winter. And it's not a big problem to play in January or in because we can postpone the end of the season in June instead of May, and we can stop one month to play the most important event in the world in the best period for the people, for the fans, for the journalists, for the player.
Qatar's potentially harmful summer heat was mentioned in FIFA's own evaluation report before the 2010 vote. Yet it only became a contentious issue afterwards. The governing body's chief investigator is reportedly touring all countries involved in what was a unique bidding process. In December 2010, just months after the first ever African World Cup, FIFA's executive committee voted for both the 2018 and 2022 hosts. Russia got the nod for 2018 ahead of England, and joint bids from Holland and Belgium and Portugal and Spain. And Qatar was picked to host the 2022 tournament, which meant South Korea and Japan, Australia and the United States all lost out. Since winning the right to host the event, Qatar has always strongly rejected any criticism of the bidding process, and organisers don't agree the heat is a concern.
Other nations have hosted similar World Cups in similar, if not more severe conditions. In addition to that, however, the promises that we've made in terms of the cooling technology, even adds more confidence to us in terms of our ability to host a very successful and very memorable World Cup.
There are many stakeholders who could protest or even demand compensation if FIFA's decision makers here in Zurich opt to move the 2022 World Cup. It's a complex mess which they must begin to untangle. Alex Thomas, CNN, Switzerland.
Well, many people have a lot riding on FIFA's decision on Qatar. Scores of contractors have tied their hopes to the construction bonanza going on there. Nearly $100 billion of contracts are either underway or pending approval. CNN's John Defterios joins us live from CNN Abu Dhabi to look at what's at stake here. So, John, as we know, Qatar has been building out for much of the past decade, but what sort of scale of construction are we looking at?
Well, it's hard to even manage it or imagine it, Pauline, in a country that only has 2 million people, 80% of them expats, trying to undertake $100 billion in projects. It's a massive infrastructure build-out that we've seen. They had this outline of the 2030 vision for Qatar, so a very long roadmap, but that's been accelerated as a result of securing the 2022 games. Let's give you a sense of the infrastructure that we're talking about. It's a very small country, but the build-out is enormous. $37 billion on rail and the metro network. So they're going to try to speed this process up. In fact, when I was there a year ago, they were digging away, but can they hit the deadline? It's a huge question. $7 billion on a road network and $15.5 billion on a new airport. It's going to take traffic from 4 million all the way up to 24 million passengers. And they hope in a couple years after that, they can double the capacity to 50 million. So the blueprint is very big. And it's fair to say that they're using the 2022 Cup as a reason to accelerate the build out of this economy. If you go back to 1992, Qatar was almost bankrupt, believe it or not. Sheikh Hamad, the previous emir who recently stepped down here in 2013, made a huge bet on LNG and natural gas exports, particularly to Asia, with more than 50 tankers going to Asia. And that turned Qatar around. So the first decade was the build-out of the brand with museums and hotels and doubling the capacity for visitors. The second decade is linked to the World Cup. So any discussion right now, perhaps moving it to the winter, which would be controversial enough, but even more so, taking it away from Qatar would be a dramatic blow because of all the build-out we talked about is linked now to that big landmark event taking place for the first time in the Middle East.
Yeah, let's look at that prospect, John. If FIFA did decide to do something radical like move the Cup entirely somewhere else outside of Qatar, what sort of impact would it have on Qatar?
Now, that is a big leap forward, so the executive committee doesn't even have that on the agenda, so maybe it's going to be tabled as an idea. But if that was going to happen, it would be quite a shock because of the previous 10-year build-out got Qatar to an amazing level in terms of per capita income. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that in history. Let's go back to 2002, Pauline. $30,700 is already high for per capita income, but put it in the top 40 around the world. That was back in 2002. And that natural gas build-out, and when the exports started to pick up, particularly to Asia, look at this. They crossed in 2012 to have the highest in the world, $102,200. But I spoke to a very prominent contractor who actually has a number of projects in Qatar right now. And he said, candidly, if you pulled the plug on the 2022 games, it would mark the end of the Qatari boom. Now, that may be an overstatement, of course, because he's got a lot at stake and he doesn't want to see that happen. But let's put this into perspective here. You see $102,000 per capita income. This economy between 2008 and 2012 was growing at 12% a year on average, even peaked out 16, 18% in that window. That dropped to about 6% last year. It's earmarked for 6.5% this year and roughly 6.5% for next year. So if you didn't have this drive of the infrastructure projects on the table right now, it's fair to say that the Qatari boom would fade away rather quickly as we see a correction in natural gas prices as well because of the shale boom that we see, particularly in North America, but spreading to other parts of the world at the same time.
Those are really impressive numbers that you've presented, and what a contrast within the beginning of the decade till now. John, thank you very much. John Defterios, live there in Abu Dhabi. And Nina, we're talking about the 2022 World Cup. So it sounds like FIFA has all the time in the world to make a decision, but they've got to really have some clarity. These contractors, these construction companies, they need some clarity because they've got infrastructure to build out.
They certainly do, and also the issue is that these tournaments are usually held in summer, and as you can see, this is a country that's located deep inside the Arabian or Persian Gulf. It has a very unforgiving climate, which is extremely hot during those months. If they move it to winter, that could be an option, which will be cooler, but of course, there's lots and lots of money on the stake, and that also messes up with other sports calendars as well. Well, the sweat and muscle going into Qatar's World Cup preparations are being supplied by foreign workers, but like many nations in the region, Qatar has been accused of treating some of its migrant labourers pretty brutally. Leonie Lakhani now takes a look at the problem and what the government of Qatar says that it's doing to solve it.
It's late into the night, and John, not his real name, is coming to the end of a 12-hour shift in Qatar's capital, Doha. He's a taxi driver who came here from his native Nepal a year ago. Driving along the outskirts of the city, the 35-year-old tells me he left his wife and kids back home and came with the hope of more pay and a better life for his family. But things didn't quite work out as he expected. I make more money here, he says, but it's really tough. It's hard. My work hours are long. John's living arrangements are just as difficult. He shares a room like this one with 7 other men in a cramped living space in the desert. There are few amenities here. But John's biggest concern is that he can't leave. He says his company is holding his passport. The passport aapke paas nahi hai? Nahi deta hai. One of the reasons he didn't want to reveal his identity. John is one of nearly 400,000 Nepalese migrants living in Qatar. The UN's labor watchdog says about 90% of the state's workforce is made up of migrants. Cases like this aren't unusual here. In fact, John is one of the lucky ones. 65 Nepalese migrants died this year in June, July, and August, many from heart failure, according to Nepal's embassy in Doha. There's more than 1 death every 2 days during the hottest months of the summer.
You're talking about a slave state. That's an extreme statement, I know, in the 21st century. But what else can you call an environment where workers are totally controlled by an employer? They're forced to live in squalor.
Qatar's labor conditions are now under greater scrutiny as it prepares to build for the 2022 World Cup. From stadiums to hotels, much of it built by migrants. Qatar's committee in charge of the World Cup says it's making workers' rights a priority.
As soon as they're brought up to the attention, or as soon as the government or the relevant authorities take a look at them, action is taken. So to describe it as a slave state, all I can say is it's simply outrageous.
Qatar's labor laws limit working hours, provide for overtime and holidays, and specifically state it's against the law for a company to hold passports of workers like John. We went to his company and spoke to a manager who didn't want to appear on camera, but admitted the company was holding the passports of its workers. He said it was for safekeeping. He knew it was against the law, but he just said many companies were doing it. Many human rights groups say the laws are often left unenforced, but Qatar's government says it's taking the allegations seriously. The country's labor minister told the local media this week that the government is committed to cracking down on any labor violations. Activists say that it's crucial if Qatar wants to prove it's worthy of hosting one of sport's foremost events. If John gets his passport back, he doesn't plan to wait around for the tournament. Wages may be higher in Qatar, he says, but life here is just not worth it. And after just 1 year, John's ready to head home. Leonie Lakhani, CNN, Doha, Qatar.
Still to come right here on World Business Today, Alibaba looks elsewhere for its IPO. We dig into what the Chinese e-commerce giant can do in New York that it can't do in Hong Kong.
banking in Africa? Think Zenith. Zenith Bank PLC is one of the biggest banks in Africa, with about 1 million shareholders and over 300 business offices in Nigeria and subsidiaries in other African countries and the United Kingdom. Committed to the best possible customer experience. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
Living Golf Minute in time with Rolex.
So this first shot, 60 yards, 64 degree. What we're gonna do is hit it a little higher. I'm gonna open the club face. That was just a normal shot from 60 yards. Just hit it in there trying to spin it. Okay, this next shot, still got the 64 degree. We're gonna put the ball back in our stance, and at impact, we wanna come down on it. Land it short of the green, usually about 2 skips. Yes, sir. Pretty good. Not bad. We're gonna try to land this third shot right on the front of the green, a medium height. Easy as that.
Why this watch? This watch is a witness to age defied, records broken, marathons won, and giant leaps taken. It's seen glimpses of heaven, miracle comebacks, and risk rewarded. It doesn't just tell time, it tells history.
And welcome back. Well, we told you yesterday about an IPO in New York that would let you own a piece of the iconic Empire State Building, but the real estate trust behind that which includes that building, made a bit of a lukewarm debut. Empire State Realty Trust raised nearly $930 million with shares priced at $13 a piece. That was at the low end of the range offering, while 2 other IPOs drew a bit more attention on the same day. Remax Holdings, that was a real estate broker, and also the retail clothing giant Burlington Stores did a little bit better when they decided to float, Pauline.
Well, Nina, another IPO that may be popping up in New York is the Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. The company announced last week that it was not pursuing a listing here in Hong Kong, and that's leading to some fierce debate on whether the Hong Kong Stock Exchange should have changed the rules for Alibaba. Andrew Stevens spoke with CNN Money's Charles Riley and asked him about the reasoning behind Alibaba's decision.
There are certain advocates who say, well, Alibaba is trying to preserve its company culture. And its founder, Jack Ma, is very interested in maintaining power. Now, here in Hong Kong, it'd be more difficult to do that than in New York. And that's partly because Alibaba wants to have its own members, this very close-knit leadership team, nominate board members. And that's not going to fly here.
So it keeps all the power within the Alibaba, this close-knit group you're talking about. I mean, to many people that would sound, well, you know, if they shouldn't be allowed to do that, because it's effectively, by going to an IPO, you're inviting other people to be owners of that company, so therefore everyone should get a say in it.
Yeah, there's plenty of stakeholders here in Hong Kong who think the Hong Kong Exchange did a good thing by not allowing Alibaba to do this. And I think from the exchange's perspective, they didn't want to be pressured. They didn't want to be in negotiations with just one company and bend the rules just on one company, because, right, it's a slippery slope. What's going to happen next time a company wants?
So is it likely that Hong Kong will now reconsider, though, and change the rules?
No, I don't think so. I think they've decided that they're going to
line in the sand.
Yeah, there's a long history here in Hong Kong of resisting these kinds of corporate structures.
Even though, I'm curious, because New York obviously is open to the idea.
New York is open to the idea. You've seen this in a lot of tech companies that have listed in New York. Google and Facebook have dual-class share structures, for instance, which allow the founders to retain control. That's been tried here before in Hong Kong, and the exchange has always ruled against it. And part of that's because class action doesn't exist here. You can't have a class action lawsuit.
Okay.
So the exchange thinks that it's doing quite a bit to protect investors.
That is Charles Riley from CNN Money speaking with our Andrew Stevens. Now, Hong Kong is trailing New York in terms of the amount raised in IPOs so far this year. An Alibaba IPO would be considered a big get because some analysts believe Alibaba could raise $12 billion if it went public. Nina.
Let's change tack and focus on the weather forecast now, because Okinawa and then potentially Shanghai are bracing for a developing typhoon in the West Pacific. Our meteorologist Pedram Jabahiri is live at the International Weather Center for us this morning. Good morning, Pedram.
Hey, good morning, Nina. Yeah, you know, we seem to be talking about this every single day. Typhoon after typhoon, tropical storm after tropical storm, and they've come in every sort of angle. We've had impacts across southern portions of Taiwan. Of course, the Philippines have seen upwards of about 20 landfalling storms in the past, say, 7 to 10 months. And southern China has seen their fair share of storms as well. But this particular feature going somewhere slightly different. And you take a look, current winds sitting at 110. Keep in mind, 119 puts you at officially a typhoon, and it certainly has everything it takes to become a typhoon. Notice the northern quadrants, very dark, very deep thunderstorm activity. That's a sign of a strengthening storm. The southern quadrants, not there yet, but you begin to see some indications that the storm is going to strengthen, and all the models do indicate this will become a typhoon inside the next couple of hours. There's Okinawa. This is pushing through for you, say, on Saturday afternoon. The storm looks like the center will actually miss Okinawa, but the right-hand side of it, which typically is the strongest side of a storm system, does begin to approach Okinawa Saturday afternoon. Certainly something to watch closely. And look what happens behind it. Talking about typhoon factory, essentially, that's what we're seeing. Yet another storm system behind this feature tries to develop in the coming days. But what's first here is this storm system makes the close call to Okinawa on Saturday afternoon. Tremendous rainfall, strong waves at the coast there, certainly going to be a problem. And then look what happens on Sunday afternoon into potentially Sunday night. The cone of uncertainty opens it up quite wide here, but Shanghai, last census, put the population about 23.5 million people directly in the path of a storm system that would be equivalent to a Category 1 at this point, with 140 km/h winds and, of course, rainfall on the order of 25 centimeters if everything stays put with the storm system. So certainly a serious storm system that could impact a lot of people, could impact a lot of business across this area. Something we'll follow all weekend here on CNN, guys.
Okay, Pedram Jabahiri, live at the CNN International Weather Center. Thanks so much for that. Well, coming up after the break, the company's fame has been built on flashy phones, but in a moment's time, we'll tell you about Virtu's different plans for the future. It seems as though bling is perhaps a thing of the past. Do stay with us. You're watching World Business Today.
America's Chris DeMarco. Paul Casey lifts the Falcon Trophy. Martin Kamer goes wire to wire. Amazing! Kamer's done it again. Sensational scenes. Kaiser Kamer scores a hat. Bunkers, dancing, aces, and Rock slays the Giants. Extraordinary. Stars fall, new stars are born.
كنت لا أكتسب الأموال الكافية لأن نصف الأسماك كانت تتعفن قبل أن تصل إلى السوق، لكن الآن أضعها في مخازن التبريد.
बिना रुकावट दे क्वालिटी पावर चिंता दी कोई गल नहीं डिपेंडेबल एंड कंटीन्यूअस बैकअप पावर एनी टाइम हु एल्स किर्लोस्कर डा बढ़िया है जी किर्लोस्कर
شكرا للشركة كيرلوسكر.
Welcome back to World Business Today. Luxury phone maker Virtu is trying to get away from its
Right, obviously, we've lost the pictures and the signal from Hong Kong, so let me tell you about what Pauline was about to tell you about. She was telling you about the luxury phone maker Virtu, trying to get away from its reputation for bling. Its handsets may be made from precious metals, as Pauline was just about to tell you, and also encrusted gems, but Virtu is still trying to put the emphasis on craftsmanship and also quality without the shiny bits. Well, it seems as though bling is a thing of the past, and also flashiness is no longer a virtue for Virtu, as Jim Bolton explains.
Virtu is polishing up its newest product, preparing to unveil its more affordable and up-to-date smartphone, known as Constellation.
So the thinking behind Constellation was to address a younger demographic, a more unisex appeal, and a more contemporary design ethic.
Vertu may be known for its bling phones, each costing $5,000 and more. But it says it would rather be known for its fine craftsmanship and high-quality parts, all being highlighted in this new handset.
When it comes down to it, what are we? We're two straight lines and a V, and the best materials in the world. Titanium, sapphire, calf skin.
That's a 5-inch screen of sapphire crystal, weighing more than 100 carats. Vertu's new CEO, Max Pagliani, says the Constellation should help position Vertu as more than a super luxury handset.
So here we are more unisex, and by introducing this range of color, we will clearly also target the feminine market.
Vertu's handsets are known as being assembled by hand, one at a time. It takes about 2 hours.
So there's no production lines here at Vertu. A kit of parts is delivered to each craftsman. They sit here, and from the very beginning to the very end, one person, one phone. And that way we ensure the commitment to the quality and the ownership of that build.
And to ensure a link with the customer, each craftsman or woman has their name etched on the inside. In this case, Joanne Cameron. It's not unusual for owners of the phones to come to the factory and meet Joanne.
Yes, yes. We've all had people come in and ask for each different paper.
Vertu was founded by Nokia as its luxury arm, but Vertu has now split off, allowing it to drop Nokia's operating system for Google's more popular Android OS.
And at a certain point in time, our objective was a little bit divergent, so they are much more focused on the mass market. And also in terms of technology, we were kind of suffering the fact that we were linked to their technology.
If you're wondering why these pricey phones are assembled in semi-rural England and not in Asia, well, so are Rolls-Royce cars and many Formula One cars and parts for Airbus.
So you'd rather have engineers and designers who've worked on aerospace than worked in watches, for instance?
Absolutely.
After all, once in a while, they are commissioned to make an extremely expensive one-off handset. And it's not just about adding more gemstones.
The most exclusive phone we ever made, funnily enough, had no stones whatsoever in it. It was a pure one-off with a one-off set of sapphire cut at crazy angles and a faceted body to the phone.
Packed by hand, many special orders. A screen that can really only be scratched by a diamond. Vertu is telling its well-heeled customers their handsets are robust and worth the price. Bling or no bling. Jim Bolden, CNN, Church Crookham, England.
A screen that can only be scratched by a diamond. That's interesting, because I bet a lot of those people who can afford a Vertu are wearing pretty big diamonds as well, Pauline.
Yeah,
well,
true enough.
That's it for this early edition of World Business Today. Ending out on that fashionable note, it's Nina Dos Santos here in London.
I wonder who that customer was who ordered that sapphire phone. I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong. In just 4 hours from now, World Business Today will be back with the opening bell on Wall Street. We hope you can join Maggie, Nina, and me at that time. In the meantime, CNN Newsroom is coming up next.
Positive transformations in association with Kirloskar.
This is the deepest submerged tunnel ever built in the world. It's 1.4 kilometers long, and depth is 56 meters underwater. Now, people are moving from one side to other side, mostly using the bridges with their cars or public transport. There are too many buses and cars, and makes a very big congestion. With this project, these congestions will end. The transportation means improvement in trade, and also the improvement on the social life of the people. So 1 million passengers per day to travel will ease the life of citizens of Istanbul.
Tonight on CNN, International Desk with Hala Garani, followed by Arman Paul. Then CNN News Center with Aisha Sasay. It's your new evening lineup, tonight on CNN.
one of the things your predecessor used to do from this very platform was deny the Holocaust.
This is Questioning Everything.
I want to know your position on the Holocaust. Do you accept what it was?
That any crime that happens in history against humanity, including the crime the Nazis committed towards the Jews as well as non-Jews, is reprehensible and condemnable.
This is CNN. CNN's original series, Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, goes to New Mexico. Get fired up.
When the zombie apocalypse comes, I'll be ready, as long as they're holding beers.
Heated up.
My face was burning off.
And beamed up.
At no point was I probed